Hello and welcome back to my channel, Boozy Bookish Thoughts. I'm Justine, or Jay if you prefer, and welcome back to my new video. So I know I missed last week, but a lot has been happening, and so I just decided to skip last week and just upload a bunch of shorts because I was preparing for this week, in which we are doing. It's kind of today is related to Halloween or related to spooky season in general, but not directly related. And then on Friday, we will be doing a special wine and book pairing with a spooky ooky wine called Hope's End, Runaway to the Dark Side. So we're gonna do a special Halloween wine and book night on Friday, and today we are going to be talking about something that I think the booktube community needs to be a little bit more cognizant about, a little bit more aware about, especially during a season where we're recommending a lot of horror books, a lot of thriller books, a lot of dark academia books. A lot of these spooky ooky books need to be properly contextualized for some people. And originally I wasn't gonna do this video today. I was going to do just a regular Tag Tuesday, but then things came up in my personal life that meant that I felt this was extra relevant. And since I've been watching a lot of booktube because of my mental health, a lot of things were being recommended to me, and I felt the need for this personally, and I think I want to talk about it on my channel. So general trigger warning for this video. There's a general trigger warning for this video. This video is talking about trigger warnings in general. So because we are discussing trigger warnings and the importance of trigger warnings, we will be mentioning the subjects or topics or content which necessitate a trigger warning. Now, most of these things will not be discussed in depth, but there will be at least in-depth discussion on unaliving, because that is something that is very personal for me, so I'm able to give a little extra insight on that. But just know that we will be talking about potentially triggering topics such as sexual assault, abortion, unaliving, like I said, and other not so fun things. Again, not graphically, but just be mindful of your own triggers. If this is something that is potentially triggering for you, I will leave a summary of what I will say in the description. But if you feel like you can handle this, and if you're interested in hearing what someone who relies on trigger warnings to keep safe then has to say, then please do give this video a listen. So the reason or the personal context that I have for this is that I've mentioned in previous videos before that I'm not mentally okay recently. I had a couple breakdowns in like late August, early September, and that was pretty bad, but I wasn't in crisis yet. But then last week a bunch of things happened and I ended up on a crisis chat line. Now, for those of you who don't deal with thoughts of unaliving yourself, crisis chat lines are there to provide a safe space for people who are in crisis or who are at risk of hurting themselves. Mostly themselves. Some occasionally I think people access it when they have thoughts of hurting others, but for me personally, I access it when I have thoughts of self-harm. And so things started really bad last week and I ended up on the chat line. And so I realized at that point I was in between books at that point. Well, not really, but I was in between audiobooks, because when I'm in that state, I don't like to read print books. I need the external stimulation of hearing something. And so I turned to my audiobook and I realized that I needed to really quickly check out the triggers. Well, actually, I did. That's the thing, though. I started the audiobook and then halfway through, I realized I hadn't checked the triggers, and I was like, "Oh man, I fucked up." And I realized that I may need to DNF this if I look it up and it has things that I don't want to read about at this point. Um, and so the point is that I have a long history of struggling with thoughts of unaliving myself, and they came back in full force last week, and so that's something I'm dealing with now. But what does this have to do with triggers and trigger warnings? The point is that when I am in this state, or when I am this mentally fragile, I do not want to be reading about particular things. There are several topics that I avoid in general, but in particular for me, any graphic descriptions of unaliving are a complete no-go. And there are certain books that I have read that I wish I hadn't read because of this trigger. Like, if I had known that this book had contained such a scene, I wouldn't have read. The book I'm talking about in this case is Lucy Foley's The Guest List, which had a pretty graphic description of an unaliving attempt, which thankfully I was in a mentally healthy place when I read it, so I didn't feel triggered, and I continued on with the book. But it was pretty disturbing, and I did I if I had known that it was there, I wouldn't have read it. Other books, a book that I have DNF'd because of this, but again, this one, a book that I not DNF'd, a book that I didn't pick up, even though it was incredibly hyped, was the Atlas 6, because when I looked up its content warnings, there was a content warning for graphic unaliving, and I was like, I really want to read this, but I don't want to risk my mental health for a book. And so the point I'm trying to make is that as booktubers, or even just as book lovers, when we recommend books to friends and family, or especially if you're a booktuber and you're recommending books to a wider audience, I feel like we need to be responsible and give them the details that they need to know to make an informed decision about whether or not they want to read a book. Now, this isn't to say that we are responsible for other people's mental health. That's not true. Everyone is responsible for their own safety and for their own mental health. However, what we are responsible for is giving them the information that they need in order to make an informed decision. Now, it's not something that a lot of people do. I mean, I've seen, like I said, I've had books hyped to me through BookTube or through my friends, and then when I look up content warnings or when I start to read it, I suddenly find myself dealing with topics I'd rather avoid, and it's a tricky subject. I know some people consider content warnings to be spoilery, but personally for me, mental health and my mental safety trumps spoilers, and the mental health and mental safety of my viewers trumps any potential spoilers, because it's you're talking about someone's mental health and how well they are, how safe they feel. We don't want someone to be consuming media that they are not ready for, And this isn't only for people who are suffering through depression. This is about all sorts of things. Some people find topics such as miscarriage triggering because they've lost their pregnancy, or topics such as sexual assault, which is obviously very distressing, or topics such as some people will trigger warnings for things like murder, even, which I understand can be triggering for some people. Other things that are also potentially triggering, which you might not think about, are things like animal death. So these are all things which you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be to the level of unaliving. Not to say that there are levels between triggers, but like most people will only think to trigger warning the extreme things. But there are other things that you can trigger, that you can provide trigger warnings for. Now, me personally, the way I measure whether or not something merits a trigger warning is through two criteria. Now, the first criteria for me on whether or not something qualifies for a trigger warning is how graphic this potentially disturbing content is in the book. Are there very vivid descriptions of the potentially disturbing topic? Is there a deep dive into a character's feelings on this disturbing topic? Are we experiencing this phenomenon through the eyes of a character real time? Is it actually something you have to go through on the page? Now, if it's very graphic, then I will provide a trigger warning. It's obviously there are gray areas. What counts as very graphic? What counts as not graphic? That all depends on you. It's not a science. There's no like light switch or gradient scale. The point is to try and be more responsible again. So again, we talk about whether or not something is graphic. So whether, if it's on the page, if it's something that you'll have to literally experience through reading it, then for me that requires trigger warnings. The other criteria that I use to measure if something is not very graphic, but however, if it does fulfill this second criteria, then I may still provide trigger warnings, and that is how relevant is this controversial topic or potentially triggering topic to the entire plot of the book. Not just plot, but I mean to the entire book, to the entire story. So let's say it happens early on and is a character forming event, then that requires a trigger warning, because obviously throughout the rest of the book they will reference back to it. If it's something that is a major key part of a character's backstory, again, this requires trigger warnings because it is formational to the character, who they are. If it's something that happens at the end of the book, even if it's considered a plot twist, I think this requires trigger warnings as well. Again, for me, trigger warnings trump spoilers, because the point is that I've had instances where I've read books and then the twist that they use towards the end is a potentially triggering topic. Luckily not for me, but I know it's potentially triggering for other people, and it's it's not fun. Like you were expecting a nice twist, you were expecting everything to come together, and instead you end up with something potentially triggering. And especially in these instances, the potentially triggering content is usually not used for much more than shock value. So I believe this deserves a trigger warning. There are some exceptions. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions. What are these exceptions? Things like if like, let's say you're reading a murder mystery, and on the description, like on the back of the book, in the inside jacket, or the description on Amazon, if it says something like a body was found, blah blah blah, then obviously you don't need to trigger warning murder, because obviously there's a murder, it says so on the description. However, if there is a vivid description of the body and of what was done to the body because of the murder, then that requires a trigger warning for, let's say, gore. Other exceptions would be, let's say, if the story is about an enslaved character who is living in antebellum South America, in the antebellum South, then obviously you don't need to trigger warning things like racism or slavery, because these are common-sensely understood to be part of that story because of the character and of the setting. And again, this is all described in the description. So if, in terms of common sense, you can already infer that certain potentially triggering topics will happen, then you might be understood to leave off the trigger warning, because again, if you don't want to read about graphic racism or um graphic racism, then don't read something that's set in the antebellum South, which features an enslaved character. You know, things like that. If based on the description and based on who the characters are and who the setting and where the setting is and all that, then the reader can already make an informed decision. Then it's understood that you're not going to provide a trigger warning for those things. However, you might still want to provide trigger warnings for other things. So again, let's say with that example, you might want to provide trigger warnings if there's graphic descriptions of torture or abuse. Then you might still want to provide trigger warnings for those. It's not an exact science. There isn't, and don't feel guilt if the person takes if you provide trigger warnings and the person still gets triggered. It's not a perfect science, and again, at the end of the day, the person who reads the book is making their own personal choice to consume the media. The point is that me, as a reader and as a consumer of media, I like to know if there's something in the book that is potentially triggering for me. I like to be able to make the informed decision on whether or not I will still consume something based on the content that it has. If you are interested in knowing where you can find trigger warnings, I highly recommend the Goodreads alternative story graph. They have a list there. For each book, they have a list of content warnings, and it's great, and it's rated between graphic, moderate, and minor, I think, something like that. But it's they're rated in terms of the severity of how vivid the trigger warning is. And it's not perfect. Again, it's not a perfect scenario. It's crowdsourced, so less popular books will have less trigger warnings, but at least, you know, for the big names, you'll be able to double check. So for all the really hyped books, you'll be able to double check. Again, I'm not even perfect about doing it for myself. Like I said at the start of the video, I started a book and didn't check. I'm not claiming to be perfect, but at this point where I am right now, in terms of my mental health and mental safety, I really need to be more responsible for myself. I really need to be checking and double checking what kind of media I'm consuming, because I don't want to think that I am engaging in a safe activity and then all of a sudden get triggered. And I believe this is very important now during this spooky ooky season, when we are recommending lots of thrillers, lots of horror books, lots of books that are potentially triggering. But don't think that these are the only books that require trigger warnings. Lots of family dramas might require this. Lots of romance novels might have potentially triggering topics such as controlling relationships or emotional abuse. So just be mindful when you read. Think about what if you're reading something and planning on recommending it to other people, then try and be mindful of what content you're reading and what content might be potentially triggering for other people. Just because it's not potentially triggering for you, or just because it doesn't trigger you, doesn't mean it won't trigger other people. So that's my little soapbox story for today. I did not drink any wine, but honestly, I'm avoiding alcohol recently, again, because it's not healthy. So I hope you learned a little something. I hope you understand why I'd always do my best to provide trigger warnings here on my channel. And again, I'm not perfect. If I miss a book with good, very necessary trigger warnings, then I'm sorry, but I do my best to be responsible. And so I hope that other people can also learn a little bit more and be a little bit more sensitive and give their viewers and their friends and family more information in order to make better choices. That's it for me. Thank you so much.